There's something profoundly unsettling about existing in emotional limbo with someone who matters to you. You've probably felt it, that gnawing sensation in your chest when you catch him looking at you with an intensity that seems to say everything, yet he voices nothing at all. You replay conversations in your mind at 3 in the morning, dissecting every word, every pause, every inflection, searching for hidden meanings like an archaeologist examining ancient fragments. You wonder if you're inventing a connection that doesn't exist, or if you're simply dealing with a man who has built such formidable walls around his heart that even he has forgotten how to climb over them. This peculiar torture, this state of perpetual uncertainty, affects millions of women across the country every single day. It transcends age, education, and life experience, because at its core, it taps into one of our deepest human needs: the need to be seen, to be wanted, to be chosen with clarity and conviction. But why do some men retreat into this maddening silence? Why do they communicate in codes and contradictions rather than speaking the simple truth of what they feel? The answer lies in a complex web of neurobiology, childhood conditioning, and the suffocating expectations of masculinity that have been passed down through generations like a genetic curse. Before we examine the specific signs that betray his hidden feelings, we need to understand the psychological architecture that makes a man choose concealment over confession. From the earliest moments of boyhood, most men in our culture are subjected to a relentless emotional indoctrination. They learn quickly that tears are shameful, that expressing fear is weakness, that vulnerability is something to be avoided at all costs. This programming doesn't just shape behavior, it literally rewires the brain. Neuroscientists have discovered that when emotional expression is consistently punished or discouraged during developmental years, the neural pathways between the limbic system, where emotions originate, and the prefrontal cortex, where language is produced, become less developed. What this means in practical terms is that many men aren't simply choosing to hide their feelings, they genuinely struggle to identify and articulate them in the first place. When such a man develops deep feelings for you, his brain becomes a battlefield. His amygdala floods his system with stress hormones because emotional vulnerability triggers the same fear response as physical danger. Meanwhile, dopamine surges every time he sees you, creating an addictive cycle that he simultaneously craves and resists. This neurochemical chaos produces the contradictory behaviors you've been trying so desperately to decode. The first sign that a man is hiding feelings for you reveals itself in the microscopic details of his attention. Picture this scenario that you may have already lived through countless times. You're at a friend's dinner party in Brooklyn, surrounded by animated conversation and clinking wine glasses. You mention casually that you've been having trouble sleeping lately because of stress at work. The conversation moves on. People laugh about something else. The evening continues. 2 weeks later, you run into him at a coffee shop, and seemingly out of nowhere, he asks if your sleep has improved. He remembers not just that you mentioned it, but the specific reason you gave. This isn't coincidence. This is his hippocampus, the memory center of his brain, encoding every detail about you with the kind of precision usually reserved for survival information. When we develop romantic feelings for someone, our brains quite literally prioritize information about that person above almost everything else. It's an evolutionary mechanism designed to help us bond with potential mates, but in modern contexts, it manifests as this almost obsessive attention to detail. He remembers that you prefer your coffee with oat milk, that you have a complicated relationship with your sister, that you once mentioned wanting to visit Iceland. These memories aren't conscious effort. They're automatic encoding because his neural reward system has categorized you as supremely important. Yet despite this granular knowledge of your inner world, he never takes the leap into direct declaration. Additionally, pay close attention to the pattern of his digital communication with you. A man hiding feelings will often display what psychologists call approach avoidance behavior in his texting patterns. He won't message you constantly because he's trying to maintain control, to not appear too eager, to protect himself from the vulnerability of seeming too interested. But when you do reach out to him, even after days of silence, his response comes with a speed that betrays the truth. He was waiting. More revealing still is the substance of his messages. If you scroll back through your conversation history, you'll notice that he asks questions, real questions that show genuine curiosity about your thoughts and experiences. He doesn't just respond with superficial pleasantries. When you tell him about a challenging situation at work, he follows up days later to ask how it resolved. When you mention feeling conflicted about a family issue, he remembers and creates space for you to discuss it further if you want to. This sustained interest across time is not how men typically communicate with women they consider casual acquaintances. It reflects a psychological investment that goes far deeper than friendship. His brain has essentially created a dedicated file folder for you, and he's constantly updating it with new information, trying to understand you more completely. Yet he still won't say the words that would make everything clear. On the other hand, you might notice moments of deliberate coldness that seem to contradict all the warmth he's shown you. Imagine you're at a bar with mutual friends, and a man you don't know well starts flirting with you, making you laugh with his stories about traveling through South America. Suddenly, the man whose feelings are in question becomes strangely distant. He turns away, engages intensely with someone else, looks at his phone with exaggerated focus, or even leaves the immediate area entirely. This abrupt shift can feel like emotional whiplash, leaving you confused and hurt, questioning whether you imagined the connection between you. But what's actually happening in his brain at this moment is a cascade of threat responses. The sight of another man capturing your attention activates his amygdala, triggering what neuroscientists call the jealousy response, which neurologically resembles the activation patterns seen in physical pain. Rather than acknowledge this feeling, which would require admitting he has a romantic stake in your attention, he employs what psychologists term defensive distancing. By physically and emotionally removing himself from the situation, he attempts to regulate the uncomfortable emotions flooding his system. It's a protection mechanism born from a deep-seated fear that if he reveals his feelings, you might reject him, and that rejection would be unbearable. So he chooses the pain of distance over the risk of exposure, even though this strategy leaves both of you trapped in uncertainty. As we move forward into understanding his body language, we discover another layer of truth he cannot control. Human beings are wired to seek proximity with those we care about, and no amount of conscious effort can completely override these instincts. When you're sitting together, whether on a couch at a house party or across from each other at a restaurant, watch what happens over the course of your interaction. He will unconsciously lean toward you, reducing the physical space between you incrementally, testing the boundaries of your comfort. He might angle his body so that it's oriented directly toward you, even when others are present, a nonverbal signal that you are the center of his attention. His hands might fidget at objects on the table, a displacement behavior that channels nervous energy. If you laugh and touch your hair, he might mirror the gesture moments later without realizing it, because our brains automatically synchronize with people we feel connected to. These micro-gestures are governed by the autonomic nervous system, which means they happen below the level of conscious control. The research in the field of proxemics, the study of personal space, shows that we allow very few people into our intimate zone, that roughly 18-inch bubble around our bodies. If he consistently positions himself within this space, and you don't retreat, it signals a mutual comfort that goes beyond platonic friendship. Yet even as his body betrays his desire for closeness, his words remain carefully guarded. Later in this process of observation, examine how he speaks about the future. A man with hidden romantic feelings will often unconsciously include you in his long-term plans through subtle linguistic choices. He might say something like, "When we finally take that road trip to the coast," using the collective pronoun we, as if it's a foregone conclusion that you'll be part of his future experiences. Or he'll mention a concert happening 6 months from now and assume you'll be his companion, saying, "We should definitely go to that." These aren't just casual suggestions. They reflect what psychologists call future-oriented cognition, where the brain constructs scenarios that include specific people who hold emotional significance. Evolutionary psychologists suggest this mental time travel served an important function in our ancestral past, allowing us to plan and coordinate with those who would help ensure our survival and reproductive success. Today, it manifests as these small verbal slips that reveal you occupy a permanent rather than temporary space in his imagined future. He's building a life in his mind that includes you, even if he hasn't found the courage to make that explicit. Furthermore, observe his reaction to your successes and your struggles with the kind of attention a scientist gives to data. When something good happens to you, when you get that promotion you've been working toward for months, when you finish writing the first chapter of the novel you've been talking about, when you accomplish something that matters to you, notice the intensity of his response. A man hiding feelings for you will react with a pride that seems disproportionate to his official role in your life. He'll celebrate your achievement as if it were his own, telling other people about it, bringing it up in conversation days later, reminding you of your capability when you express doubt. This phenomenon is explained by what researchers call empathic joy, where the brain's reward centers light up in response to good things happening to people we love. Brain imaging studies show that when we care deeply about someone, their victories activate the same neural circuits as our own accomplishments, flooding us with dopamine and creating genuine pleasure. Conversely, when you're going through difficulty, when you're stressed about a family crisis, or overwhelmed by a work deadline, or hurt by a friend's betrayal, he transforms into someone almost protective. He wants to fix everything, to remove every obstacle in your path, to shield you from pain. This caretaking impulse, while sometimes frustrating when you simply need someone to listen rather than solve, comes from a place of deep emotional investment. Your well-being has become neurologically linked to his own sense of security and happiness. Moving deeper into the subtleties of his behavior, pay attention to how he acts around other women when you're present. This is where his hidden feelings often become most visible through the contrast. If he has romantic feelings for you that he's concealing, he'll typically adopt one of two strategies with other women. Either he'll be noticeably cooler and less engaged with them than he is with you, creating a clear hierarchy of his attention that any observer could detect. Or he'll do the opposite, overperforming friendliness and charm with other women in a misguided attempt to seem unattached to you. This second strategy often backfires because it's so transparently performative, but it stems from a genuine fear that if he shows you special treatment, his feelings will become obvious and he'll lose the safety of ambiguity. These social dynamics reflect what psychologists call strategic self-presentation, where people manage their behavior to create specific impressions. He's trying to control the narrative, to maintain plausible deniability about his feelings, but the effort itself usually reveals more than it conceals. Another powerful indicator lies in the consistency of his presence in your life. Even during periods when you're not actively spending time together, he finds ways to maintain the connection. He sends you articles he thinks you'd find interesting, memes that match your sense of humor, songs that reminded him of conversations you've had. These small gestures serve a crucial psychological function. They keep him active in your awareness, preventing the natural fade that occurs when people don't interact regularly. Attachment theory tells us that when we form deep emotional bonds with someone, our brain develops what's essentially a need for contact maintenance. It's not a conscious decision, but rather a neurobiological drive to preserve the connection. Even when logic might suggest he should create distance to protect himself from unrequited feelings, his attachment system pulls him back toward you again and again. Finally, there's one sign that supersedes all others in its revelatory power: the way he looks at you when he believes you're not watching. This is the moment of absolute truth, when his carefully constructed defenses fall away. Maybe you're reading something on your phone and he thinks your attention is phone absorbed, or you're talking to someone else and he assumes you won't notice his gaze. In these unguarded seconds, his expression holds everything he's been trying to hide. There's a softness, an aching longing, a tenderness that he would never allow you to see directly. It's the look of someone memorizing a face a treasure, someone savoring a presence they fear might one day be lost to them. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that prolonged eye contact triggers oxytocin release and creates bonding, which is precisely why he looks away the instant you turn toward him. He's protecting himself from the intensity of that connection, from the vulnerability it would require him to acknowledge. So now you know the signs, the hidden language his body and behavior are speaking, even as his words remain silent. The question becomes what you do with this knowledge. Every situation carries its own complexity. Sometimes a man hides his feelings because he's emotionally unavailable for legitimate reasons, perhaps healing from past trauma or navigating a difficult life transition. Sometimes it's pure fear, the terror of rejection that feels so overwhelming it paralyzes any attempt at honest communication. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. You deserve more than breadcrumbs of affection. You deserve someone with the emotional courage to be transparent about what they want and how they feel. If you recognize these signs in someone and you share the feelings, perhaps it's time to initiate the conversation yourself, not to pressure him, but to honor your own need for clarity. Life is too precious to waste in the fog of maybe, in the exhausting work of constant interpretation. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask the question that frightens you most, because the answer, whatever it is, will free you to move forward. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in this story, write the word signs in the comments below and subscribe to this channel for more insights into the hidden emotional landscapes of relationships, because understanding others starts with understanding yourself.